Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Fruits and vegetables, the cargo manifest filed in Larnaca had recorded. A few hours later, Transport Aéreo Rio Platense's 2-decade-old Canadair CL-44 4-engine turboprop disappeared off the Soviet Union's air defense radar one summer morning in 1981, showering recoilless rifles and tank parts over the mountains near Yerevan. Later, it would be said that a Sukhoi 15 pilot had crashed his jet into the plane when it defied commands to descend. Other stories involved a missile or a simple mid-air malfunction. The Argentinian crew died together with the British-born Miami-based arms dealer Stuart Allen McCafferty. The aircraft had made 3 earlier flights ferrying military equipment secretly sent by Israel to Iran as part of a $70 million lifeline of aircraft engines, tires, and tank parts provided by the nation the Ayatollahs called Little Satan. Earlier this week, as Israeli missiles plowed into military bases near Tehran, Khuzestan, and Ilam, long-awaited retaliation for Iran's earlier strike on Israel, some have predicted the beginning of a regional war that could end up drawing in the great powers. That is indeed a possibility. A second possibility, though, is just as likely. Iran's strike, many experts believe, was designed to demonstrate it could hit Israel, but without causing the maximum damage possible. Israel, in turn, seems to have heeded United States advice to avoid hitting Iranian nuclear targets or oil infrastructure. Even as both sides exchange lethal blows, they seem to be stopping just short of the edge. This should be the end of the direct military exchange between Israel and Iran, one United States official said after the attack on Tehran, and that's been true. The story of the mysterious aircraft downed in 1981 helps us understand the forces that are acting to restrain both countries even as their leaders blow the trumpet of war in public. The historian Jay Menz has called the Israel-Iran confrontation, I quote, a war without a name. The conflict between the two countries neither resembles conventional warfare, of the kinds both have fought with other enemies, nor the Cold War, nor the battles by proxy waged across South Asia. There is indeed some question as to whether the Iran-Israel conflict can be conceptualized as a war at all. The use of force, after all, is concerned not with demonstrating military power, but compelling the one to accept the existence of the other as a credible geopolitical regional actor. Full understanding of this complex dynamic requires understanding that for much of their history, the strategic interests of Iran and Israel actually converged. To contain the rise of Arab nationalist regimes, both countries collaborated on intelligence gathering and missile production. Iran secretly sold oil to Israel. Former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres even offered Tehran nuclear power technology at one stage. Even after its arms sales to Iran were exposed, thus potentially damaging Tel Aviv's relationship with the United States, Israel signed a $135 million deal with its own devil, which included Lance and Hawk missiles, laser-guided artillery shells, and field guns. The arms shipments were to be routed through Rotterdam and Antwerp. According to one estimate, Israel sold Iran almost half of the weapons it acquired in the first months of the new theocratic regime's existence and war with Iraq. Following its war with its own Arab neighbors in 1967, scholars Bishara Behba and Linda Butler have written that Israel rapidly transitioned from an agricultural economy focused on citrus and the like, to a technology and electronics powerhouse. Firms in the civilian sector like Tadiram, Amcor, Soltan, Volcan, all big names now, installed production lines and emerged as subcontractors to big military industries. This industry proved to be Israel's key geopolitical influence tool. A Central Intelligence Agency analyst observed in a now declassified memo written in 1985, the arms sales to Tehran were a tool to gain influence when what it saw as an inevitable United States Iran rapprochement took place. Israel also saw Iran as a long term source of energy security and as the key to its strategic interests in the Persian Gulf. Times might have changed, but those interests haven't. The collapse of the Soviet Union, followed by the destruction of Saddam Hussein's Iraq, removed the pillars that held up this security cooperation. The two countries, though, continue to share many vital interests. Take, for example, containing the power of jihadi movements who are opposed to both of them, or ensuring stability in the Middle East for the sake of their economies. Ever since 2020, Israel has committed itself to a doctrine it calls decisive victory. Essentially, the idea that its technology will enable the complete destruction of enemy capabilities within days or just hours. The Israeli concept, expert Jean-Luc Saman points out, resembles earlier doctrines in other parts of the world for high intensity operations of limited durations. India used to have cold start, the United States has an air sea battle doctrine. The Israeli doctrine seeks to deliver decisive defeats on what it calls rocket based terror armies like Hezbollah or Hamas, as well as their sponsor Iran. There were plenty of skeptics, though, who argued that such doctrines are more political manifestos than thought through military plans. The build-up of military force to secure quick victory, many critics have argued, is simply too expensive to be realized, and the outcomes, more important, are prone to the inherent uncertainties of war. Even worse, Saman noted, Israel's decisive victory strategy took for granted Israel's ability to control or dominate the logic of military escalation. The Israel Defense Forces, in its vision, would determine when an operation started and when it ended. That in turn rested on the assumption that Israel's superior military means would guarantee quick victory. General Andrian Danilevich, among the Soviet Union's most perceptive strategists, warned that overwhelming superiority actually did not guarantee victory. If the military art could be reduced to arithmetic, he observed, we would not need any wars. You could simply look at the correlation of forces, make some calculations, and tell your opponent, we outnumber you 2 to 1, victory is ours, please surrender. It was not like that. For its part, besieged by United States sanctions, Iran turned to what's come to be known as the Rings of Fire strategy. Knowing it could not win a conventional war against the United States, Tehran developed tactics of asymmetric warfare, which were intended to inflict losses its enemies would not be willing to suffer. The country also cultivated proxies, as we know, from Gaza to Yemen to ensure future wars would have to be fought on many fronts. The assumption was that Iran would be able to outlast its enemies through the sheer force of numbers. The soldier and historian Dave Palmer famously wrote, though, attrition is not a strategy. It is, in fact, irrefutable proof of the absence of any strategy. A commander who resorts to attrition admits his failure to conceive of an alternative. He rejects warfare as an art and accepts it on the most non professional terms imaginable. He uses blood instead of brains, Palmer pithily concluded, and that's what the Iranians were at real risk of doing. Today, these doctrines of both Israel and Iran have led them into a lose-lose situation. Iran's rings of fire have not secured its frontiers. Instead, its economy is crippled and the regime is losing legitimacy within. Even though fantasies the Ayatollahs might be overthrown by protesters have proved ill-founded, the country remains isolated and vulnerable. For its part, Israel's maximum force decisive victory tactics have led it to lose international legitimacy and even Arab allies in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And in the not too distant future, it could find itself confronting a nuclear armed Iran. From the restraint both Israel and Iran have shown as the Gaza war began to spill across borders in April, it's clear their military leadership understands this, notwithstanding the hostile polemics of politicians. The Ayatollahs in Iran, though, like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government in Israel, are in danger of locking themselves in political traps of their own making, which allows them very little room for maneuver. Earlier crises of this kind were tamped down by superpower intervention, which often ensured regional adversaries were compelled to back down from self destructive intransigence. A United States mired in domestic political crisis and an international system broken by the war in Ukraine has, however, proved unable to respond effectively this time around. This has left Iran and Israel both perched on the edge of lines both know they would be very ill advised to risk crossing. Their leaders, though, have left themselves no easy route for retreat. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor at ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.